The last time that we had a high inflation event was in 2000. And before that, it was 1984. So unless you've been in real estate for more than 22 years, you've probably never ever traded through a high inflation environment. Now, inflation is an interesting thing because the only tool effectively that the RBA has is to actually increase interest rates. Naturally, when you increase interest rates, what we know is that every single time that happens, property prices actually come off. And this is what we're going to call a repricing of the asset base. Now, when you're working inside of high inflation markets, it's important to know that interest rates will continue to climb until they actually get to a point that ideally that the interest rate of the day is not deflationary nor inflationary, but it's what we're going to call neutral. And really what the whole idea here is to do is to try to get the economy back on track because it's literally spiraling ahead at some ridiculous amounts of speed. Now, when you think about the amount of money that the government actually pumped into the economy and the amount of money that was pumped into the global economy, that's why we've had one of the most incredible residential booms in such a short period of time over the course of the 2 years of the pandemic. Now, more than ever before, what we've got to realize is that whatever goes up the most is usually the market that comes back the most. And so this is that whole idea that if property prices in your area went up by like 80%, and there's probably every chance that in that particular area that property prices might even fall 10, 20, even 30% compared to the height until we actually get to the trough inside of that market cycle. But what you must remember is that ultimately we work inside of market cycles. Traditionally, going from peak all the way around to a declining market, all the way back to the peak of market is like a 7, 8, maybe even 9-year cycle. But what we've seen recently is that we've been going from peak to trough and back to peak in under 18 months. So what's driving this aggressive nature of market cycles? Well, there's huge amounts of government policy. There's huge amounts of geopolitical things that are happening around the world. Supply chain crises, which are ultimately driving high inflation. And naturally, off the back of that, we're in a position that Australians just want to do something great with property. It's a really important part to actually realize that when you're working in a declining market, it's really critical to make sure that you're in a position that you continue to go to reprice assets. You can no longer rely just on the marketing itself. It now becomes about marketing and great relationships. What actually happens is that agents move back to buyer matching. This is where you have a look at other 3-bedroom homes that you sold last year. You get on the phone, you ring every single person who inquired or physically inspected those properties and see how many of those buyers still have an appetite to purchase. Then, if they do want to buy the property, it's pretty simple. You get them there at a private appointment. Maybe one at 2 o'clock, maybe one at 2:15, maybe one at 2:30, so that naturally they feel that level of perceived competition. It's no longer about just turning up on Saturdays to do open for inspections, and nor is it about referring buyers to those open for inspection times. It's actually finding the buyers who want to do the transaction, getting them in the car, taking them to the property through a private appointment, and actually selling that property midweek. High inflation markets are not something to be worried about. It's just a different set of skills. Now, more than ever before, what you've got to do is you've got to encourage the seller to actually come to market. You've got to encourage the buyer to actually come to market. And ultimately, you've got to give confidence to both parties. That's what great real estate agents really are. They're confidence dealers. And in high inflation markets, more than ever before, you've got to remember it's not just the cost of ownership that's going up, it's also too the cost to rent a particular property at any one point in time. What I ultimately say to buyers, if you're worried about the higher increase in interest rates, then how are you going to be going about the higher increase in rents? And this is one of the great challenges is that until inflation starts to settle, we will continue to see cost of living actually increase. What do great real estate agents realize? At the end of the day, births, deaths, marriages, divorces, real reasons why people actually do residential real estate transactions still happen. What you've got to remember is that out of all the sellers that are selling today, 99% of them are still selling for far more than what they actually paid for that individual property. So move the reference point back to the date of purchase, not the date of the market appraisal, nor the date of the listing presentation. It's critical to understand that when an asset gets repriced, it's not just the home you're representing, it's every property in and around that particular price range. Got to bring the skills to the table to be able to do more transactions more often in declining markets.